Good afternoon. It seems we're now live with our Care4Care event. Thanks very much for joining and welcome to this FEPS and FES event on in the Care4Care Policy Series. And well, if you joined this event, I'm sure you know that a little bit over a year ago, the European Commission has released its first ever European Care Strategy, which is a completely new policy initiative in this field for the European Union. This was, of course, very much a reaction to the COVID pandemic, but also this kind of growing recognition of the importance of care in European societies. And it's a document that aims to address EU policy gaps and enhance EU coherence on care provision. So what we're going to do here today is discuss whether the care strategy actually manages to do that in the field of long-term care. And just to kind of contextualize, long-term care is the type of care that is usually provided to people over a long-term basis, perhaps throughout their entire lives, either to people who are elderly or disabled, but there's also other reasons, of course. And so what we're going to try to do is, with our panel of experts, to assess the care strategy's performance in this field and make recommendations on how to further improve this. And the discussion is based on the FEPS and FES joint policy study on the European Care Strategy, which came out on the 8th of March this year. So we have a great panel of speakers with us. We will first hear two presentations from authors of two of the chapters of the policy study. First up, we'll have Tuscany Bell, who leads the work on care at the European Federation of Public Service Unions. And she will talk about the provisions on long-term care for the elderly and the overall conditions in the working conditions in the long-term care sector. And then we have Florian Sanden, who works on disability rights at the European Network on Independent Living. And he will discuss provisions on independent living for disabled people. And then we also have two discussants with us. First of all, we have Lisa Pelling, who is the head of the Stockholm-based think tank Arena Ide, apologies. And then we have Letizia Thiessen, who's the senior policy analyst on gender equality at FEPS. And we're in an online space, but we would still very much like to have an interactive discussion. So if you're participating, please feel free to put any comments or questions you have for the panelists into the Q&A section, into the comment section, into the live stream comments box, wherever you're watching this, you can comment. And we'll try to pick up those questions and comments in the Q&A session at the end of the panel. Okay, so I think now we go directly to Tuscany's presentation. Please.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here for the final session of the Care4Care Policy Series. I did listen in to all the others, I've read the policy study of FEPS, and there's many interesting ideas. As Eleanor said, I work at EPSU, the European Federation of Public Service Unions, which is the representative trade union federation in the care sector. And I was very happy to contribute to the FEPS policy study on the European Care Strategy. And in general, in EPSU, we welcomed the European Care Strategy, which recognises the immense challenges facing the care sector, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. But it's important, I think, to start looking back further than 2019 and the pandemic, and emphasise that the problems we saw during the pandemic did not begin with the outbreak of COVID. It was the policies of the previous decade that left the care sector so vulnerable and so ill-equipped to handle the pandemic. So I'll start by giving a bit of context on the previous decade. And I think the main challenge that kind of came through that was the staff shortages in the care sector, which have been worsening over time. As the population has aged, the demand for long-term care has grown at a much quicker rate than the growth of the workforce. And to demonstrate that with a couple of statistics, as an average across the EU, in 2011, you had 4.8 long-term care workers per per people aged over 65. And by 2016, this had dropped to 3.8 long-term care workers per 100 people aged 65 and over. And if we look forward, by 2050, we will need over 1.6 million more long-term care workers, just to keep the coverage at the same level as today. And due to the staff shortages, in many situations, the care workers are not able to provide the level of care that they want to provide and the level of care that the care recipients deserve. And this places an extra emotional burden on the care workers, increases their psychosocial risks, leads to burnout, and therefore perpetuates this vicious cycle in which staff shortages, in fact, lead to more staff shortages. Low pay is another reason why it's so difficult to recruit and retain care workers, because despite the strenuous nature of care work and its fundamental value to society, many care workers are found in the bottom third of the wage distribution. And these workers are overwhelmingly female, dominated by women. And there's a really strong gender dimension to why care work is so undervalued. Because while low pay is common across health and care sectors, the data shows that the higher the proportion of women workers, the lower their average relative income. And these issues in the care sector for care workers have been exacerbated by austerity measures and the retrenchment of the welfare state following the 2008 financial crisis, which opened the way for outsourcing and commodification of the care sector with disastrous consequences. And we've seen many scandals in the last couple of years, which have revealed abuse of workers and residents in elderly care facilities, restricting of food, restricting of sanitary products, tax avoidance, and illegal contracts with the care workers. So a lot has come to light of the problems of commodification of care. And even though private care providers are substantially financed through state subsidiaries, as I said, they're abstracting millions from the sector in the form of profit, nursing home real estate, management fees, and complex debt schemes. And in private care, competitive tendering and profit-oriented strategies have also encouraged cost-cutting, driven down wages, and made care services less available for low-income communities. And this market mentality fundamentally changes the nature of care work, because the more traditional understanding of care, which is tending to the emotional and physical needs of someone, comes into conflict with market logics of measure, profitability, time constraint, cost reduction, and economies of scale. So in order to make care provision more efficient, the relationship building aspects of care have largely been replaced with repetitive, standardized tasks, which are to be completed as quickly as possible. And this also helps to justify the care profession as low skilled, and thereby justifying low wages. And in many countries, we also see that rather than tackling staff shortages by improving pay and conditions, many EU countries have instead relied on low-paid migrant workers to fill the gap. And these migrant workers are often subject to these substandard conditions. So that's a bit of the context of what led up to the European Care Strategy as following the COVID-19 pandemic. And as I said, in EPSU, we did welcome the European Care Strategy because I think it took stock of a lot of these issues. It recognises that care is a public good, and that there cannot be a resilient care sector without a resilient care workforce. It also recognises the need for collective bargaining, and in this way, it's complemented by the EU Minimum Wage Directive, which calls for 80% of workers to be covered by collective agreements. The care strategy builds on several pieces of EU legislation linked to working conditions, such as the Work-Life Balance Directive and the Framework Directive on Occupational Health and Safety. And it also recognises that a lack of strictly applied high-quality standards can lead to neglect and abuse of care recipients and poor working conditions. So definitely we welcome it, but I'll just conclude by saying from EPSU, it doesn't go far enough, and giving a few of the policy points that we would have liked to see included. We would have liked to see far-reaching structural changes that ensure public funding intended for those in need of care is spent on the care rather than taken out in the form of profit. We would like to see more measures that ensure the human rights and dignity of care workers and care recipients are protected, the need for regulatory frameworks that enforce transparency and accountability. And we would have liked to see more provisions that not only limit privatization, but reverse the privatization that we have seen. So care services instead should be integrated into public health systems and national social protection systems. And we would have liked to see finally in the country-specific recommendations, provisions that encourage investment in care services rather than encourage austerity measures, which we have seen over the last 10 years. So I'll leave it there. And yeah, I think that was the 7 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tuscany. That was really insightful. Next up, we have Florian. Please take the floor.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this event. Thank you also, Tuscany, for your presentation. I think we might have an interesting discussion afterwards. I'm here to represent the European Network on Independent Living, which is a Europe-wide cross-disability NGO, which was founded in 1989 by disabled people, mainly survivors of institutions. The independent living movement started in the 1960s in the United States, when disabled people for the first time were able to came together, organizing independent activities independently, and realized that all of them had similar problems, that they were excluded from society, were not able to access education, work, or family life on an equal basis with others, and often had to go to segregating services in education, to special needs schools, or had to live in institutions, and if not, were institutionalized in their homes because they could not do anything else. I would like to start the content-wise part, a more content-wise part of my presentation, by talking about the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the UNCRPD, which is also called the Convention, which is an international human rights treaty adopted by the UN General Assembly in 2006. It did not create, but outlines how it did not create new human rights, but outlines how the Universal Declaration on Human Rights applies to disabled people. The Universal Declaration on Human Rights states that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights, and that they are entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind. The UNCRPD built on this and established the human rights model on disability. By first of all introducing a distinction between impairment/medical condition and disability, which results from social, environmental, and attitudinal barriers rather than the impairment itself. Second, universal equality and entitlement to all rights and freedoms means that disabled people have the right to be free from discrimination on the basis of disability, defined as any distinction, exclusion, or restriction on the basis of disability, which has the purpose or effect of impairing or nullifying the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise on an equal basis with others of all human rights and fundamental freedoms. The European Union and all member states have signed and ratified the UNCRPD and promised its 87 million disabled citizens access to all areas of life on an equal basis with non-disabled citizens. From what was said, it follows that disabled people have to have access to mainstream education because everyone else does. On this, the Commission communication on early childhood education and care and the subsequent Council recommendation have done a good job, because they say that disabled children need to be included without exception and reasonable accommodations to be found. The part of the Commission communication on the European Care Strategy and the Council recommendation on long-term care, they fail disabled people, and we have to say that we don't welcome it. They speak of the UNCPD and the need for person-centered care, but then fail to fully embrace the institutionalization. Both documents speak vaguely of traditional care models and person-centered services as two equal options. This means that resources the care strategy wants to mobilize to improve services will flow into institutions and not community-based services. Institutions are settings where disabled people can be kept against their will, where they have to share assistance, have no control over who provides the assistance, have their freedom of movement restricted, and have to accept uniform activities. Institutions prevent disabled people from leading a normal life. Institutions are a form of violence which can cause great damage to one's health, a dreadful quality of life. We do not force any other societal group to live like this because of some property of theirs which they can't control. Therefore, institutions are discrimination and we need to stop it. Under the human rights model of disability, it is not enough to just ban institutions. One has to offer help in compensating for the disabling factors through the provision of services called community-based services for disabled people. Contrary to segregating services, like the institution, these services are to be controlled by the users, not the professionals. The most important community-based service is called personal assistance. A personal assistance is not a temp or a secretary. Personal assistance is a needs-based service, meaning that disabled people who require it are accompanied by one or more support persons for as much time during the day as needed and receive the help in all areas of life required. Some disabled people might need 24/7 support and a whole team of PAs. Others are fine just with a couple of hours. Contrary to a normal care service, in personal assistant disabled person, the user is supposed to be in control. Ideally, the user hires, recruits, trains, and supervises the assistants themselves. The assistants should be employed by the user directly and paid through direct payments transferred to the user by the managing authority. Personal assistance is vital to support disabled people to live lives on an equal basis with others. One example is our co-chair at ENIL, Nadia Haddad, who is largely paralyzed, can only move her shoulders. Due to personal assistance, she lives in her own apartment in the center of Brussels, works as a civil engineer at the university, provides over a Belgian disability rights organization, co-chairs the annual board, and engages in many more activities. Allowing disabled people to live such fulfilling lives is a goal we should subscribe to. Personal assistance is arguably a resource-intense service. However, Europe still loses billions of euros each year to tax evasion. According to the European Tax Observatory, financial resources the size of the GDP of France are being kept in offshore havens. Employees and workers are taxed 3 times currently, in corporation only once, if at all. So we say, let's create social justice and do something with the money, which really helps. At the moment, the EU Council is working on some council conclusions on care, which the Commission will have to incorporate into the care strategy. And it has submitted amendments, and we hope that via this way, we can still make a change to the care strategy so that it fully embraces the institutionalization and the change needed to community-based services like personal assistance. There are others, of course. We can go into detail. At another point, the disabled people don't need long-term care. What we need is disability support. Thanks for now. Can add more details in the discussion.
Thank you very much, Florian. That was really eye-opening, I think, for most of us. So thank you both for the presentations. And at this point, I think I would like to invite our discussants to have their first reaction on the presentations that were made. Pose any questions that you have to our presenters, and I may add some of my own, and then we'll take it back to the presenters. So Lisa, could you start us off?
Yes. Thank you so much, Elena. Thank you, Florian. Thank you, Tuscany. And congratulations on the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung and the FEPS and the EBSO for these excellent initiatives and these very important contributions. I myself had the pleasure to work on these issues back in 2021 when we were trying to understand what happened to the care sector during the pandemic. And I'd just like to underline what Tuscany said. We published a report called On the Corona Frontline, Care Workers in 9 European countries. And the reason why we named it Frontline, because this is how care workers and care workers unions lived it at the time, that they were really at the front line, also in the spotlight, but also just underlining what Tuscany said. What they suffered during the pandemic was not something that was related only to the pandemic. These were structural deficits that the care sector had suffered from long before, and the trade unions and trade union activists on all levels had been talking about, warning about, so they should not have come as a surprise to anyone. And I'd like to underline a second part of that. The lack of staff was, of course, exacerbated during the pandemic when the tasks were so much larger for the care workers, but also this was nothing new. Of course, this added to the emotional stress that the care workers suffer under, but also the physical burden. And I think it's important that when in the strategies going forward as progressives, as trade unionists, as people that have a care workers perspective, we criticize privatization, we criticize the marketization of this sector. We need to bear in mind that this does not only affect the working conditions of the care workers, but also, and we saw this very clearly during the pandemics, the care workers are also dependent upon other parts of the welfare services to function. Many of them are mothers. Many of them have care work to do themselves. So when you marketize, when you understaff, when you have structural deficits and weaknesses in the entire welfare sector, this will also affect care workers' working conditions and their ability to do a good job. So we did, and this I will add this to my very short now initial presentation. We made detailed studies into care worker trade unions in 9 European countries that were on this Corona frontline, and we did an evaluation 2 years later that was published early this year. And we called it Post-Pandemic Hopes and Disappointments. Now, post-pandemic, I don't know. We are not really out of the pandemic, even though it's most the emergency is maybe over, but the pandemic is, of course, something that we will have to live with. So what did we find out when we looked at what had happened 2 years later? I'd like to share some of these points with you, because I think they tell us something about what is important also in a European strategy on these issues. So what happened when care workers and care worker unions were on the spotlights, on the front line, received a lot of attention, a lot of support? Well, some trade unions managed to pass new labor laws. Spain is a case in point, and I think this points to the needs of new labor laws being passed across Europe, not least to get rid of precarious working conditions that were so fatal when it came to the pandemic, with people working part-time, sometimes in several institutions at the same time, spreading the infection from care homes to people's private homes and back. Also, another big victory was reached in Scotland, where workers in the adult social care sector started to receive the Scottish living wage, again pointing to a fact that Tuscany also raised the underpayment of workers in this sector. There was also in many countries, and here Sweden is a case in point, the passing of and the starting of development of specific long-term care legislation that had been lacking in many countries. Also in Spain, Ley de la Dependencia was developed, which is very important. And then finally, maybe as a very important victory, I think, was the new legislation that was passed in Germany on staffing, which again, speaking of the lack of staff, but also the lack of proper payment of the staff, I think Germany took, and the trade unions in Germany have taken a very important step there, and it's impossible to spell this word because it's so long, Gesundheitsversorgungsweiterentwicklungsgesetz, but it is fundamental and very inspiring, I think, to other countries. So summing up, I think trade unions in the care sector played a very important role in the pandemic. This has been proven as well that they were crucial in making sure that the pandemic didn't hit harder than it did. But I think care workers' trade unions are also instrumental and essential in forming the policies ahead. And I think we can all testify that these trade unions have lots of ideas, lots of policy proposals, and they should be listened to. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now we have Letizia.
Thank you very much. Indeed, I have to say that I'm particularly delighted that we have the pleasure to finish this series of webinar addressing the need to tackle care with this particular dimension, which has been for so long undervalued, but also invisibilized in the whole conversation on care, generally speaking. But also when it comes to the available legislative framework at EU level, for instance, when it comes to tackling long-term care specifically, but also other types of care that include disability care. And in fact, here there are two important things that come out from the two presenters' introductions. On the one hand, we are standing in front of a longevity revolution. And in fact, this is something that the care strategy is a signal of that the European Union is understanding that the previously held assumption that EU law has very little relevance for long-term care of elderly people, but also other types of vulnerable group is increasingly under question. And so therefore, and that is something that we can come back to in the conversation, EU law is actually a very important element in the policy context within which changes to long-term care and care as a complex concept are taking place. In fact, some of the other authors in the report that we are here to disseminate, and particularly I would also like to draw your attention to the chapter by Jean-François Lebrun, who is specifically targeting or addressing this point, is that we see that the greater life expectancy has meant that the number of older people, so 55 to 64, elderly people 65 to 79, as well as very elderly people, so 80 and plus, has grown to unprecedented levels, which are steadily increasing. And so, for instance, also those over 79 are expected to triple triple by 2016. In a way, these are also very positive trends, because it means that people are living longer, but this also poses very complex challenges for policymakers. First of all, it's putting into question the sustainability of our pension systems. It is also raising the question of inclusion of long-term care of both those needing care, but also providing care, and that was very well illustrated. It was complementary in the interventions both by Florian and by Tuscany, as well as raising questions about the adequateness of the health and social care services. Moreover, rising life expectancy does not necessarily always mean that we have a rising healthy life expectancy, because long-term care also is very often synonymous with frailty and impairment, and so therefore we see that the increase of old age is also going in parallel with declining physical and mental health, making them very often dependent on other people, and that can be very much also underlined in the case of women, where, for instance, we know from statistics provided by AGE, the European Institute for Gender Equality, that yes, women tend to live longer, but many times in poorer health and in much more precarious conditions. And so these challenges are also exacerbated by an increasing lack of available and adequate care, mainly due to migration trends, which is something also that Tuscany very well underlines in her chapter, but also the transformation of social welfare changing, as well as changes in family structure. And so we see here that one of the key challenges that governments and the European Union have in front of them is also to address these rising needs of care. But at the same time, what also comes very strongly out of these two presentations is that we are in front and that we are witnessing a much broader care revolution, whereby care is not only limited to childcare or care for the elderly, but it's a much more complex notion that covers and relates to a very diverse range of needs when it comes to the services that need to be provided, but also the individuals that are concerned. Not all children, not all elderly people have the same needs, and also care is not just limited to these two reductory groups, as Florian was very well at illustrating. And so here I think it's very much important that as we continue the discussion on how to address care in a proper manner at EU level, we need to be very mindful of the care relationships and also on the idea of interdependent relationships, whereby both the relation between the care receivers and the caregivers need to be valued. So the rest, I will stop here, having reached my time, but I look forward to the conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for raising really excellent points. Before we hand over to the presenters again, I also wanted to sort of add in a bit of questions from my side. I mean, because you've both raised some points where you suggested that there were certain strengths, or at least some aspects of the care strategy could be considered strengths for the long-term care sector, and of course major shortcomings, in particular from Florian. So I would like you to also reflect, if possible, on whether you think as a whole this care strategy package is well equipped to address the needs for care, the growing needs for care that we have in the EU, and particularly in the long-term care sector, and if not, then how concretely can we improve these, and in particular also taking into consideration sort of shorter term strategies, but also longer term strategies, right? Of course, these are very different approaches if you're looking at something that can be done with the existing document as it is, or how would you like to see it reformed in the future? I think it would be really great if you could reflect upon that. And maybe we can start with Florian in reverse order.
Yes, thank you for giving me the floor again. Several points were mentioned by you, which relate to this strength and shortcomings issues. Many things you point out, and also, well, I have to say, the relationship between the independent living movement and the unions is very contentious often because we don't really manage to understand each other's perspectives often. First of all, what is said about that we need more care workers in the sector, better staffings. As such, like every time there's, for our perspective, there is a yes, but also a no. On more care workers, yes, we need more staff, but not for institutions or segregating services. Like institutions can be nursing homes or long-term hospitals. We need more staff in community-based services, and I can say something more what this entails. I agree with what EPSU says that or what the care strategy tries to achieve, that we need a stronger role of the non-for-profit or non-profit dimension in this sector, and less resources being taken out by for-profit companies. I agree, but at the same time, from the point of view of the independent living movement, it's not in our interest only to have state-based actors in this. For us, the role of the third sector is much more important. Some of our members are service providers themselves, but they are private, non-for-profit. Personal assistance user cooperatives are very important for us. The first one, still it's called in Sweden, was founded by a key independent living activist called Adolf Ratzka, which got to know about independent living in the United States and brought it to Europe. So this is that we need to encourage investment, yes, but as far as disabled people concerned, it's not long-term care, but the support services I mentioned. The situation in the care sector during the pandemic was dreadful, and this needs to be addressed. Yes, but not by trying to reform institutions, which is a broken sector, but accelerating the switch to community-based services. On the role of where we disagree a bit, probably a bit more, the successes of unions in pushing for better working conditions. This is, of course, great that they have this success, but it's a good opportunity to challenge the fundamental misunderstanding. Unions often, unfortunately, don't have a significant disabled membership, and within unions, the role of disabled people is often marginally. Therefore, at the current point, we cannot say they represent us. And also, most social service providers, they often act like disabled people, but disabled people usually have no role in them. So we have to contradict. Unions and social service providers do not represent us. Our entire membership has to be disabled, and our board is disabled. Me too, I have two psychosocial impairments. So, and the UNCPD gives us the right to have an equal say at the table when matters which concern us are being negotiated. But in practice, this usually does not happen. Our role in designing the care strategy was marginally, and I see it over the social service providers pretend they represent it, that there's some kind of like lawyers or something. But this is not the case, and this is something which needs to change. On the progress in certain countries, like Spain was mentioned, And FOSS, this is really not a good example, which shows the problem with the care strategy. It strengthens the institutional sector, but when it comes to community-based services for disabled people, we have large problems in Spain. In the region of Andalusia, there are 11 personal assistance users, but only on a pilot project basis. And one of our members is going to lose his assistance and might then have no choice but to live in an institution, so he will be cut off. And families have no choice but to institutionalize their children very often, because in some areas, community-based services, they are still a pipe dream. But not reality. Other countries in Europe are better, doing this somewhat better, like Sweden, also Germany to a certain extent. So it shows that this is possible. We need some big changes in the care strategy, and this is something we try to achieve through the council conclusions which are being negotiated. At the same time, we often, as often said, that we are against good working conditions of support staff, and this is absolutely not the case. We criticize that in many countries, personal assistants, for example, have very bad working conditions, low pay, also no protection whatsoever, and this needs to change. We need personal assistants who earn competitive wages, are also part of collective bargaining agreements. We need this too, and we have the same problems when it comes to exploitation of female workers in the area. Many personal assistants are women, and this very much contributes to the bad working conditions. We see it often that when a sector is women enter it, the working conditions deteriorate somehow. Then it's not important anymore, which is a big problem, yeah, which cannot continue. So with this, we are on the same page. Like if unions would just accept our perspective a bit more, we could actually work together more. But there is
okay, that's great. But let's then give Tuscany a chance to also respond to the comments. Thank you very much, Florian.
So I'll try and kind of respond to the question and respond to Florian as well. On the need for community-based services and person-centered, I don't think this is something we're against. I think just when we talk about the staff shortages, I mean, to have person-centered care and to have community-based care, you do need more workers. I mean, it's more one-on-one. So I think solving the staff shortages is a prerequisite, a precondition to having this kind of care. So I don't think it's a disagreement necessarily. It's just, I mean, you need the workers to deliver that care. On inadequate things in the care strategy, I think I already started mentioning a bit, but we think the provisions on for-profit care are not strong enough. It calls for tighter quality mechanisms, but yeah, this really doesn't go far enough, especially if we look at the abuses that we've seen in a number of scandals. So other things that we could propose there would be, for example, to have conditionalities attached to public funds. So if you're receiving public funds, you have to have collective agreements in places, you have to respect certain working conditions, stuff like that, possibly also having profit caps on how much money can be taken out of the sector. I think that's, I mean, just in general, regardless of what you think about for-profit or not-for-profit, if you look at how underfunded the sector is, does it make sense that this amount of money is being extracted from the working conditions and the quality of care? Also a focus on changing the nature of care work, and this goes hand in hand, I think, with the attractiveness of the sector. I mean, why would a worker work in the care sector for the same wage that they would get in, I don't know, the hospitality sector or or in retail, when the working conditions are so strenuous and you're not valued for the work that you're doing? And I think I saw a comment in the chat again about the fact that it's highly dominated by women workers, and I think that's a very important point, that this kind of work is undervalued, because stereotypically it has been seen as something that women kind of do naturally, like women care, like women look after the children, women look after the elderly, therefore they'll carry on doing this for like a low wage. And I think that really needs to be addressed, how we value care work in society. And possibly, I mean, we like a focus on changing the gender dimension of it. Why aren't there more male workers in the care sector? So valuing of the care work. I think I mentioned staff shortages already. I think in terms of staff shortages, where the care strategy doesn't do well is that it focuses on migrant workers. And as I mentioned, we're just subjecting these migrant workers instead to substandard conditions. And of course, we're not saying that we shouldn't have legal pathways for migrant workers to come to Europe. That's not at all what we're saying, but we're saying we should change the conditions to attract the workers, as opposed to having this very kind of employer-driven migrant scheme, which is actually like outdated models from the past, where the employers just go to foreign countries and say, these are the migrant workers we want to fill our conditions that we're going to give. So that's, I think, another shortcoming of the care strategy. And maybe just moving on to the second part of the question, what can be done with the document that we have? Well, it did get watered down actually in the negotiations with the council. Originally, it called for national plans to be established within 12 months. I think that was changed to 18 months after the negotiations with the council. And what we're doing is really encouraging our national unions, so at national level, to be very involved in establishing those national plans and making sure that they're much more concrete in how they will be implemented at national level. So that's, and what can be done and what we're encouraging national affiliates to do.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, both. Maybe, Leticia, actually, you could expand a bit on Tuscany's comment on the gender equality dimension of, and of course, Florian raised it as well. But indeed, we have a question from the comments, thank you, about how to specifically support women caregivers, or in fact, the majority of caregivers. And in fact, maybe I would even broaden this question a little bit, because we're talking about the paid care sector, but of course women are also the majority of caregivers in society. Also, informal care is overwhelmingly provided by women. So how do you see the role in the care strategy and other gender equality policies of the EU in improving this?
Mm-hmm. Well, perhaps if you allow me, I would also take the opportunity, whilst answering to this specific question, to also address one of the other questions that was addressed in the chat by the participants. That is, what is the definition of care that we understand? And this is really very closely connected with a feminist understanding of what care is and should be about, and has been really at the center of FEPS and together with FAS efforts to also try to somehow enshrine the idea that we should follow a holistic and comprehensive definition of the notion of care. And to do that, also, we very much follow the feminist literature on the ethics of care, particularly, and some of you might already be familiar with the definition by Joanne Tronto and Berenice Fischer that was already framed in the 90s. And they define care as an activity that includes everything that we do to maintain, continue, and repair our world so that we can live in it as well as possible. That world includes our bodies, ourselves, our environment, and all of which we seek to interweave in a complex, sustaining web. So this definition might, in a way, seem a bit abstract, but also it helps us also to take a step back, and through the ethics of care, to promote a proper understanding of care, whereby care is about caring for others, and where care should be a good, and where society should promote the quality of care, so that people may live as well as possible and value the centrality of those activities underpinning care, rather than seeing society just as a set of autonomous individuals only driven by rational aims, also drifting a bit away from this usual idea of care being a natural skill that only women can do. But here the logic is truly to actually reverse the dynamic and put the emphasis on actually recognizing care as a right for itself. Now, when it comes to the gender dimension specifically, of course, it is known that mostly women are affected, and most of the care work also is unaccounted work. And I think here it's actually just timely that many people now got to know the name of Claudia Goldin, who has just been awarded the Nobel Prize for Economy. And at the heart of her work, she has been actually one of the driving thinkers to actually show that female labor market participation is many times hampered and slowed down due to their involvement and overrepresentation in unpaid care duty, particularly what she's also calling the female enclave. And too often what should be said is that this is necessarily a question of individual choice, but something that is just that they are just confronted with. And so here, political, social, economic, and demographic changes in developed welfare states have led to concerns about rising demands for services, particularly support services for older and disabled people. On the demand side, we see increased longevity, reduced morbidity, and political pressure from citizens and disabled and older people that need long-term care, which has led also to a growing realization amongst policymakers and practitioners that present service levels, particularly in health and long-term services, which are inadequately funded. On the supply side, we also see falling birth rates and changes in family structures, as well as neoliberal changes to welfare provision, as already underlined earlier by Tuscany, which have stressed the importance of activation policies ranging from welfare to work programs for women, lone parents, disabled people, and long-term unemployment, but also changing relationships and expectations within families and within communities have meant that there are falling numbers of unpaid and family carers available, and that there have been substantial changes to the welfare mix of contributions from the family, the state, the market, and widest civic society. And so here what we see is that care policy is really an illustrative example of a social and structural issue that have very profound effects on outcomes, and that can either exacerbate or reduce gender inequalities. As we know, women also often bear the double burden of being responsible for childcare, but also supporting disabled and older family members, taking part whilst at the same time taking part in paid employment. And this contributes in turn to the gender pay gap, which, as we know, in the European Union is still standing at 16% for the EU average, and contributes to women's higher risk of poverty. And so here, I'm not going to expand on that because this was already mentioned several times, but we also see a shift across public sector, across within sectors, from the state to the private, from the state to the family, and all of these economic factors have led to changes in the governance of welfare, with as a result the increasing commodification of services and the deprofessionalizations of practitioners. So in a way, we see increasingly fragmented, unresponsive, and dehumanizing, and so that is also why we need to strongly advocate for an equal sharer and equal care model, whereby not only women are the main responsible for these care duties, but society as a whole.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Leticia. Okay, we are moving into a wrap-up mode. So I would like to give everybody a chance to kind of give us their final wrap-up message, which I would like to theme, where do we go? How do we keep this topic on the agenda of the EU going forward, right? Because the COVID pandemic brought it right up to the top of the agenda, but we seem to be in this polycrisis moment where we're moving from one urgency to the next. So how do we make sure that care in general and long-term care in particular stay on the top of the European agenda? Maybe we can start with Tuscany.
Okay, well, it's interesting question. I will actually start by echoing what Lena said in the chat, because Lena is one of our Finnish affiliates, and she mentioned that EPSU and the social employers as the employers. We've just managed to establish a sectoral social dialogue committee for social services. And a lot of these issues we will discuss in the social dialogue committee, and of course, there we'll look to negotiate agreements and things like that will improve working conditions for the whole social services sector. What we can do, I guess, as general as trade unions and as CSOs is just I think keep. I mean, the aging population, I think, is undoubted. That and climate change, I think, are the two biggest crises. So I think we just have to keep highlighting that. And yeah, I don't know what else exactly we can do to keep it on top of it. But I think along with climate change, it's the biggest issue, and keep the debate going, keep having discussions like this in forums like this, keep collaborating, even with the independent living movement, find synergies, find ways we can work together, because ultimately I think we do all have the same aim, and that's how we keep it on top of the agenda, by keeping working together for the same issues.
Fantastic, thank you. Florian. Unfortunately, you're
Sorry,
muted.
I forgot to unmute myself. Okay, first of all, how to keep long-term care on the agenda. When it comes to disability, we finally need to understand that long-term care is not the answer. Disabled people need support, not long-term care. Support, this is actually, this is not just invented and pipe dream by the independent living movement. This is clearly established terminology in the UNCAPD and the subsequent jurisprudence, which is it's quite a specific concept, and it signifies a paradigm shift from the medical model of disability, which is still in everybody's head, that disabled people are just incapable due to the impairments. This is the incapacity paradigm, you could also call it. And the long-term care, when we think about this, we think about people who are incapacitated. But yeah, there is no need to further justify or provide evidence. Disabled people, when they have to support, when the disabling factors are being compensated, can just participate in society like everybody else. And this is a paradigm shift where we finally need to get in our heads. For example, it's interesting that the social dialogue was mentioned. I'm a supporter of the social dialogue, but if they decide about disabled people, currently disabled people organizations have no seat at the table, because we assume they are somehow, I don't know, represented by someone, but it's not the case. For this we advocate what's called co-production. It's also in the UNCAPD. That disabled people, representative organizations, get a seat at the table, and we also need a general shift about this by policymakers. There are also members of the European Parliament, members of national administration. They often think, okay, we talk to service providers, it's fine, we call it disabled people. No, it's not. It's not the case. Go to disabled people's organizations, see if they are genuine disabled people. DPO, disabled people's organization, means that they have to be governed, really run by disabled people. It's not enough to have a few token disabled people. They have to be really run. And keep in mind, if issues affect disabled people, you have to talk to them equally, like you would with a social service provider. Yeah, this is a shift we need. And with this in mind, then we could also improve the, let's not call it long-term agenda, let's call it long-term care and disability support agenda. If we change the terminology, then we are on a good path already, finally. In the current council conclusions, we still see that this has not sunk in at all. We sent amendments and letters explaining why we're not happy to many national administrations, but even with signatures from members. But in the council conclusions, it was not taken into account of all. I don't know what they do it. Put it in the bin probably. And there is the same mention about yeah, the unions and the care sector getting together, but DPOs have no seat on the table there. Yeah, we need a paradigm shift, and we are very welcome to explain some more what this entails. Maybe we should set up a meeting with EPSU. We are very happy to present the concepts and to explain. This is our job.
That sounds like a very concrete way forward. That's great. Let's move quickly to Laetitia and we wrap up.
Thank you very much, Elena, and perhaps also to finish on a slightly positive note. I think we should also not forget that the European Union is only at the very beginning of its journey towards inclusive care. In fact, we should bear in mind that historically the European Union has had very limited competences in the field, and so the hope is also to, over time, and thanks to concrete actions like the care strategy, to keep the ball rolling and to see this initiative as only the first step and a springboard towards a more comprehensive and inclusive provision of care that include not only childcare, which is typically one of the domains that has been addressed the most comprehensively at EU level, but also care for elderly people, disabled people, minorities, those working in the sector, so not only on the care recipient side, but also caregiver side, so that we also have we have the opportunity for the EU to enhance this very complex and inclusive vision of care. And also we should not forget that actually EU primary law actually expresses a strong commitment towards people in need of care that is enshrined already in its legislative framework. Sometimes that can also be addressed through Article 3 on human dignity, Article 2 on human dignity, Article 3 on well-being of people, of course famously the Article 157 on gender equality, but also health and safety, age equality, and so on and so forth. And so these provisions need to be wisely used to contribute to ensure that relationships of care, of love, and solidarity are nurtured and valued, and particularly so in a context as we are looking at EU elections, where we need policymakers to really embrace a strong stance on tackling current care deficits. And so that is why I would like to make a strong call also that even if we are still speaking in an economic climate that might sometimes not be in the advantage of pushing for care policies, it can never be a counter argument using economic priorities in order to bypass fundamental rights and social rights.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that indeed very positive and very concrete note, Laetitia. At the end, okay, we've come to the end of our time. It's been a really great discussion with very varied views. This is always really great when you're on a discussion in Brussels. It's not always a given. And I think we've heard really concrete policy recommendations, which can very much be taken forward. Hopefully the colleagues from FES and FEPS who are here today can really lead on pushing these through towards policymakers to make sure that that they're heard and they're amplified. And yeah, congratulations again on the policy study, which is excellent. So I recommend everybody reads it, and let's make sure that care stays on top of the agenda for the European election. So